When Charlotte Bennett, 29 years old, appeared at the door of millionaire William Ashworth's mansion with a 4-year-old girl in her arms, she had no idea that this desperate plea would forever change two destinies. With torn clothes, disheveled hair, and eyes filled with tears, Charlotte spoke the words that froze William's blood. "Please, sir, can I clean your house in exchange for a plate of food for my daughter?" But when William looked carefully at the child's face, his world collapsed. Those eyes, that smile, that face shape, she was identical to him. Impossibly identical. Because this child was the perfect portrait of his daughter Emma, who had died 5 years earlier in a tragic accident. Or perhaps Emma had never really died. Ashworth Manor stood majestically in the rolling hills of the Cotswolds, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens that reflected the golden light of the English countryside sunset. William Ashworth, 45 years old, one of Britain's wealthiest entrepreneurs with a fortune of 500 million, was sitting in his study when he heard the doorbell echoing through the empty manor. It was a November evening. The cold wind across the Cotswolds brought with it the scent of oak trees and the crisp country air. William wasn't expecting anyone. For 5 years, he had lived practically in isolation, after his wife Frances and his daughter Emma had died in a car accident that had destroyed his life. The only people he saw were the housekeeper, who came 3 times a week, and his solicitors for business matters. The second ring annoyed him. William rose from the leather armchair where he was reading business documents and headed towards the main entrance. Through the video intercom, he saw a female figure in the shadows, with something in her arms, probably another door-to-door salesperson or someone asking for donations. But when he opened the door, what he saw took his breath away. Before him stood a young woman of about 29 years, with long brown hair disheveled by the wind, and green eyes filled with desperation. She wore torn jeans, a worn red hoodie, and battered trainers. In her arms, she held a 4-year-old girl with blonde, curly hair and a little face that slept against her shoulder. The woman was trembling, not only from cold, but from fear and humiliation at what she was about to ask. When she raised her eyes to William, tears began to flow down her dirty cheeks. With a broken voice, she whispered the words that would change everything. She asked to be able to clean his house in exchange for a plate of food for her daughter. They hadn't eaten for 2 days. William felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he had buried for years. But while he watched the woman pleading for help, the child in her arms slowly awakened. The little girl lifted her head from her mother's shoulder and looked at William with blue, sleepy eyes. At that moment, time stopped. William stared at the child's face and felt his blood freeze in his veins. Those blue eyes were identical to his. That face shape, that small mole on the right cheek, even the way she tilted her head when confused. It was like looking into a mirror of the past, like seeing his daughter Emma again when she was 4 years old. The resemblance was so incredible, so precise, that William had to lean against the doorframe to avoid falling. His heart was beating so loudly, he thought even the street could hear it. With a trembling voice, he asked the child's name. The answer froze him. Emma. The child was called Emma, exactly like his dead daughter. William felt his world collapse. It wasn't possible. His daughter Emma had died 5 years earlier. He had seen her body at the hospital, had organized the funeral, had wept at her grave for months. Yet this child, without another word, William let them in immediately. As Charlotte entered the manor with Emma in her arms, William couldn't take his eyes off the child. Every movement, every expression, every little gesture was identical to what he remembered of his daughter. It was as if the ghost of his past had materialized before him. But how was it possible? And who really was this woman who presented herself as Emma's mother? William accompanied Charlotte and Emma into the manor's great hall, where the lit fireplace created a warm and welcoming atmosphere. The child looked around with wide eyes, impressed by the house's dimensions and elegant furniture, while Charlotte still seemed incredulous at being invited in. While he prepared food in the kitchen, William continued to observe Emma secretly. The child had sat beside her mother and was playing with a worn rag doll, probably the only toy she possessed. Each of her movements confirmed the incredible resemblance to his daughter. He returned to the hall with a tray full of food. Charlotte thanked him with tears in her eyes, while Emma began to eat with the appetite of someone who hadn't seen food for days. William asked them to tell their story. Charlotte explained that she had become a widow 2 years earlier, when her husband Mark had died in a workplace accident. Since then, she had struggled to get by, doing odd jobs and trying to raise Emma alone. 3 months ago, she had lost her job at a factory and could no longer pay the rent. Since then, they had been sleeping in the car or in makeshift shelters, but William's attention was entirely captured by Emma. The child had finished eating and was now looking at the paintings hanging on the walls. When she saw a family photo with William, Francis, and his original Emma, she stood up and approached it. With her sweet little voice, she said that the child in the photo looked like her. Charlotte looked at the photo and visibly paled. William explained that this was his daughter Emma, who had died 5 years earlier with his wife in a car accident. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then Emma did something that made William shudder. She called him Daddy, with the same intonation, the same sweet tone his daughter had used. It was impossible, yet. Charlotte quickly took Emma by the hand, apologizing and explaining that the child was confused. William suddenly stood up and headed to his study. He needed to check something that could explain the impossible. He opened the safe and took out a file he hadn't touched for years. All the documents related to the accident from 5 years ago. He reread everything carefully, looking for something that had escaped him before. Then he found something strange. In the hospital report, there was a handwritten note in the margin. Identification problematic due to body condition. Additional DNA verification required. He had never seen this note before. He rummaged through the papers and found another shocking document. A DNA test request signed by himself, but next to it was a sheet saying, "Test cancelled at family's request." But he had never cancelled any test. He returned to the hall with trembling hands. Emma had fallen asleep on the sofa, curled up like a little angel, while Charlotte tenderly covered her with a blanket. William asked Charlotte a crucial question. Did she know anything about Emma's origins? Was she really her biological daughter? Charlotte replied, offended, that of course she was her daughter, that she had given birth to her at Oxford Hospital in 2019. William sat beside her and told her he believed there was something they both needed to discover, something someone had hidden for 5 years. The next morning, William woke early after a sleepless night. He had let Charlotte and Emma sleep in the guest room, but hadn't managed to close his eyes. He went down to the kitchen and prepared breakfast, a gesture he hadn't made for years. When Emma arrived, she immediately ran to him smiling and thanked him for letting them sleep there. William knelt to her level and asked if she remembered anything from when she was very little, before living with her mummy. The child thought, but shook her head, remembering only her mummy and Daddy Mark. William told Charlotte they needed to go to Oxford Hospital. He suspected there had been an error, or something worse, 5 years ago. He explained his theory. He believed the child he had buried wasn't Emma, and that their Emma was his daughter, the one he thought was dead. After an hour's drive, they arrived at the hospital. William had called ahead and organized a meeting with Dr. Harrison, the head of the pediatric department, who had also been on duty 5 years earlier. Dr. Harrison received them in his office with a worried expression. When William asked him to look carefully at Emma, the doctor observed her and became pale as a sheet, whispering that it wasn't possible. The doctor stood up and went to some files. With trembling hands, he pulled out a medical record and opened it on the desk. What he revealed shocked everyone. On the night of the accident, It wasn't just William's wife and daughter who were involved. There had also been another car with a couple and their child. The couple had died instantly, but the child had survived. Charlotte's biological parents had died in that accident, but she wasn't with them that night. She had stayed with her grandparents. Emma was in the other car, William's wife's car. But there had been a tragic error during identification. The conditions were so severe that they had confused the children's identities. The child William had buried was the daughter of the other family. Emma, his Emma, had survived and had been sent to the orphanage as an orphan of the other family. Shortly after, Charlotte and her husband Mark had applied for adoption. Through a series of bureaucratic coincidences, Emma had been placed with them under a new identity. No one knew about the initial confusion. William looked at Emma, who was watching him with her innocent blue eyes. His daughter was alive. His daughter had always been alive, and had grown up just kilometers away from him without his knowledge. But Dr. Harrison added that there was something else he needed to know. The error hadn't been completely accidental. Dr. Harrison closed his office door and returned to the desk with the air of someone about to reveal a terrible secret. He explained that shortly after the accident, he had received a visit from an elegant man who identified himself as a lawyer for William's insurance company. The man had convincing documents and knew private details about the family. He said he wanted to spare William the trauma of seeing his daughter in that condition. The doctor, young and inexperienced, had believed him. The man had also offered a substantial donation to the hospital. Shortly after, the same man had returned with other documents, saying that the surviving child from the other accident needed to be quickly placed with a family, and that he had already found a perfect couple, Charlotte and Mark.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
William suddenly realized the extent of the manipulation. Someone had orchestrated everything, ensuring Emma ended up with Charlotte and Mark, far from him. When the doctor described the man, tall, about 50, with gray hair and a scar on his left hand, William recognized him immediately. It was Victor Sterling, his former business partner, the man he had fired and reported for embezzlement just before the accident. The puzzle pieces began to fit together. Sterling had always hated William's success and had sworn revenge when he was exposed. Dr. Harrison revealed other disturbing details. After Emma was placed with Charlotte's family, Sterling continued to come to the hospital regularly. Once, he had heard him say on the phone that William must never know the child was alive, that his suffering was the price to pay. William clenched his fists. Sterling had not only stolen millions of pounds from him, but had also stolen 5 years with his daughter. 5 years of love, growth, irreplaceable moments that would never return. Charlotte, who had listened to everything in silence, intervened, saying that William should think of Emma first. The child needed stability, not revenge. William looked at Emma, who had listened without really understanding what was happening. The child looked at him with her innocent blue eyes and smiled, spontaneously calling him Daddy again. William's heart broke and mended at the same time. His daughter had called him Daddy again, and this time he knew she was really his daughter. He told her gently that she had done nothing wrong. On the contrary, she had done something wonderful. She had returned to Daddy. But while hugging Emma, William knew the battle had just begun. He had to face Sterling, but first he had to understand how to handle the situation with Charlotte, who had raised Emma as her own daughter for 4 years. The journey back to the manor was charged with tension and silence. Emma slept in the back seat, oblivious to the emotional earthquake that had shaken the adults' lives around her. William drove with his gaze fixed on the road, while Charlotte stared out the window with tears silently sliding down her cheeks. When they reached the manor, William carried Emma to the guest room and put her to bed, tenderly kissing her forehead. For the first time in 5 years, he was saying goodnight to his daughter. The emotion was so intense, he had to leave the room to avoid bursting into tears. In the hall, Charlotte sat on the sofa, her hands trembling as she held a cup of tea. William sat opposite her, both aware of the difficult conversation they had to face. Charlotte explained that Emma was her life. She had raised her since she was 6 months old. She was the only family she had left after Mark's death. William replied that he understood her pain, but Emma was also his daughter. He had lost 5 years with her. 5 years when he had mourned her death and visited an empty grave. Charlotte replied that she had spent 4 years loving Emma as if she were her own flesh and blood, caring for her when she was sick, comforting her when she was afraid, teaching her to walk and talk. William stopped by the window, looking at the dark garden. They faced an impossible dilemma: how to resolve the situation without destroying Emma? Both loved the same child, both with legitimate but apparently incompatible rights. Then William had an idea. He asked Charlotte if they necessarily had to choose. Emma needed both of them. Him because he was her biological father, but also her because she was the only mother she had ever known. He proposed they become a family, all three together. He wasn't talking about marriage, but about living together as a family, raising Emma together. Charlotte had neither home nor job, and there was room for everyone in the manor. Charlotte initially protested, saying she couldn't accept his charity. But William explained it wasn't charity. It was a necessity. Emma needed stability, and the only possible stability was having both of them in her life. Charlotte thought for a long time, then asked what would happen to Sterling. They couldn't let what he had done go unpunished. William tensed at his former partner's name, but Charlotte was right. If they didn't stop him, he might try to separate them again, or destroy other families. They decided they would face Sterling together, with Emma safe but present, to show him what he had caused with his cruel games. The next day, William discovered that Sterling lived in a manor on the outskirts of Oxford, bought with stolen money. That evening, while Emma slept, William and Charlotte prepared for the meeting that would finally close the circle of Sterling's revenge. It was time to face the past, to protect Emma's future and their new family. Sterling's manor was lit with soft lights when William and Charlotte arrived the following evening. They had left Emma with William's housekeeper after gently explaining they had to settle an important matter for their future together. When Sterling opened the door, his face transformed from a cordial smile to an expression of pure terror upon seeing William. The man stammered a surprise, while William told him in an icy voice that he needed to speak to him about his daughter, Emma. Sterling let them into his manor's drawing room, furnished with expensive furniture, probably bought with William's stolen money. When William told him Emma was alive and he had found her, Sterling's face revealed total panic. The man collapsed into an armchair, his face in his hands. Under pressure, Sterling confessed everything. When William had fired and reported him, he had lost everything: wife, children, reputation. He wanted William to feel the same pain. He had orchestrated the identity swap, the false documents, the placement with Charlotte and Mark. Charlotte shouted at him that Emma was just an innocent child, asking how he could have used her for his revenge. Sterling explained he thought she would grow up better away from William, that he didn't want to harm her, but only make William suffer. William approached Sterling, rage boiling in his chest. He told him he had stolen 5 years of his life with his daughter. 5 years when he had wept over an empty grave while she grew up believing she was an orphan. Sterling admitted regretting it every day, that when he saw how destroyed William was, he understood he had gone too far, but it was already too late to turn back. William pulled out his phone and showed Sterling he was recording the conversation. He told him he had just confessed everything: kidnapping, document forgery, corruption. He would spend the rest of his life in prison. But before calling the police, William wanted to tell him something. His revenge had failed, because instead of destroying his family, he had created something even more beautiful. Emma had had a wonderful mother who had loved her like her own daughter. And now the three of them were a stronger family than they would ever have been before. He explained that Charlotte and Emma would live with him, that Emma would have the biological father she deserved, and the mother who had raised her with love. Sterling had tried to break a family, but had created a new one. 3 months later, Ashworth Manor was completely transformed. Charlotte had agreed to live there as an extended family, and gradually she and William had discovered they had much more in common than they had imagined. It wasn't romantic love, at least not yet, but it was respect, affection, and a shared devotion to Emma. Emma had accepted the situation with typical childhood simplicity. William was her biological daddy, and Charlotte was her heart mummy, and for her, this was perfectly normal. Sterling had been arrested and sentenced to 10 years in prison for his crimes. Before being taken away, he had written a letter to William asking for forgiveness and thanking him for not seeking physical revenge. One spring evening, while Emma played in the garden, William and Charlotte sat on the terrace watching the sunset. They reflected on how it would have been if Emma had never appeared at his door that night. William would have remained a bitter man who hated the world, and Charlotte would still be homeless with a child to raise alone. Fate had strange ways. Sometimes the most beautiful things were born from the most painful situations. Charlotte began to say something about their future together, then blushed and stopped. William looked at her tenderly, telling her he didn't know what the future held, but that he respected her enormously, and Emma adored her. The rest they would see with time. Emma ran towards them, her blonde hair shining in the sun, calling them both to come and play with her. William and Charlotte looked at each other, smiling. This child called them both with names that represented love, not biology. They stood up and ran into the garden, where Emma waited for them with open arms. A family born from pain, grown in hope, and consolidated in the purest love. That for a child who had reunited two broken hearts and helped them heal together. The story of William, Charlotte, and Emma proved that sometimes second chances come dressed as tragedies, and that love can truly be born from the most unlikely circumstances. If this story has touched your heart and made you believe in the power of family love, give it a like and share. William, Charlotte, and Emma prove that families aren't built only through blood, but through love, dedication, and the will to fight together. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate the power of second chances and show that love can be born even from the most difficult situations. Hit the bell. Remember, sometimes the people we least expect become the most important in our lives. Never underestimate the power of destiny and the importance of opening your heart to unexpected possibilities.